I was sitting in the kitchen when Ethan came up from the basement. His heavy boots thudded against the old wooden stairs, echoing lightly through the quiet afternoon. I looked at him over the rim of my teacup, waiting for a smile, a greeting. But Ethan said nothing. His face was pale, and his eyes were so alarmed that I set my cup down. "Ethan? What is it, sweetheart?" He didn't answer right away. He looked at me, then around the kitchen my husband, Henry, had tiled by hand, brick by brick, 40 years ago. Finally he spoke, slowly but clearly. "Grandma, pack your things. We have to leave. Right now." I thought I'd misheard. "What?" "Don't call anyone. Don't tell anyone. Just trust me. Please, Grandma." My heart pounded in my chest. Ethan wasn't the type to panic. He'd grown up around the wood shop, had accidents, even faced off petty thieves, but I'd never seen that look in his eyes, a kind of fear that was both grounded and desperate. His hands trembled as he placed his phone on the table, the screen still showing a string of images, though I didn't get a good look. "You saw something down there, didn't you?" "Not now, Grandma. They could come back any moment. We have to go." My story begins that night, when my grandson came up from the basement looking like someone I didn't recognize. Whatever Ethan found down there changed everything. Before I go on, let me know where you're listening, and if you believe in truth, family, and fresh starts at any age, hit subscribe. We're building a community where no one gets left behind. My name is Margaret Callahan. I'm 68 years old and used to think I knew my children better than anyone else. I live in the house my husband, Henry, built with his own 2 hands. He was a carpenter, a quiet man who loved his family most simply, through hard work and the things he left behind in every room. Henry passed away 4 years ago from a sudden stroke. Since then, I've lived here alone but never lonely, until recently. Ethan is my eldest grandchild. He's 25, broad-shouldered, and looks eerily like his grandfather, even down to how he furrows his brow when thinking. He didn't choose college like his parents hoped. Instead, he learned a trade, opened his own woodworking shop, and still wears Henry's old tool belt whenever he works. On the first anniversary of Henry's passing, I gave him that belt as a silent message. He still lives through your hands. Now that the belt was on Ethan's waist, he opened the truck door and helped me into the passenger seat. I carried just one small bag, some clothes, my heart medicine, and a photo of Henry in my wallet. The truck pulled away from the leaf-covered path that hadn't yet been cleared for fall. I glanced back through the side mirror. The kitchen light was still on. The red maple Henry had planted the year our first son was born still stood tall. But the peace I once trusted had shattered. Ethan didn't speak the entire drive. He just kept checking the rearview mirror, gripping the wheel tight, like anyone might suddenly appear behind us. I didn't know what we were running from. I only knew if Ethan said staying was dangerous, I believed him. I never thought I could decline this fast. Just 2 months ago, I was walking the dog around the neighborhood, baking pies for the neighbor kids, climbing the stairs, both flights, only needing one breath to catch myself. Then, one morning, I woke with a dull headache, like someone had cinched a rope around my brain. At first, I thought it was the flu, but then came the nausea, the dizziness, the insomnia, the confusion. Like waves quietly crashing in. I lost nearly 10 pounds in a month. My house slippers, once snug, slipped off my feet. My old wool sweater hung loose. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman I didn't recognize, pale, sunken-eyed, and slowly fading. 2 weeks ago, I collapsed in the bathroom. Thank God for Nancy, my neighbor of 30 years, who knocked on the door after noticing the bathroom light had stayed on all night. She yelled until I crawled to the door, barely opened it, and managed to whisper, "I'm dizzy," before passing out cold. I woke up in the hospital, blinding white ceiling. A young doctor, barely older than Ethan, pulled a chair close and said, "Mrs. Callahan, your blood work shows elevated carbon monoxide levels. We believe you've been exposed for an extended period." I blinked. "Carbon monoxide? You mean poison gas?" Yes, ma'am. Do you have a CO detector in your home? I do. My son, Brian, checked it just last month. What about your garage? Any chance you've left the car running inside without ventilation? My garage is detached, and I barely drive anymore. He typed something into a tablet, nodded slowly, then spoke in a tone softer than a gentle breeze. We'll monitor you, but I suggest having your heating and ventilation systems inspected. Carbon monoxide can leak from sources you'd never expect. Brian arrived shortly after, still in his dress shirt and tie. He looked worried, but not panicked. He spoke privately with the doctor. I couldn't hear a word. When he returned, he gave me a small smile and sat by the bed. Mom, the doctor thinks maybe you left the car running in the garage by mistake. Do you remember anything like that? I shook my head. The past few weeks were a blur. Not really, but I don't think I did. You've been a little forgetful lately. It's okay, Mom. Happens to everyone. He gently squeezed my hand, the same hand he used to hold when learning to walk. Now, that squeezed me to my bones. Brian drove me home that day. He checked the CO detector, pressed the test button. It beeped. See? Still working. You're safe, Mom. But I didn't feel safe. Ethan came by a few days later. He brought his grandfather's old wooden toolbox, the one I used to dust every month since Henry passed. His boots hit the wooden floor with that familiar thump, thump, the sound I used to hear every evening when Henry came home from the shop. As soon as Ethan stepped into the house, he froze. His eyes widened as he looked at me. Grandma, you've lost a lot of weight. I nodded. I can't eat much lately. My stomach's been acting up. We sat in the kitchen. He drank his coffee while I just held my cup for warmth. Ethan had those steady, observant eyes that seemed to notice what others missed. You said there were cracks on your bedroom wall? Yes, I noticed them a few months ago near the window. Ethan frowned. Let me take a look. He carried his toolbox upstairs. I followed slowly, each step deliberate. The bedroom, where I had slept beside Henry for 30 years, felt colder than usual. Ethan examined the wall, then knelt by the vent. This was repainted recently? Brian said he did it to stop the draft. Energy saving, he called it. Ethan didn't answer. He stayed there a long time. Then he muttered under his breath, This isn't right. This shouldn't be sealed. He turned to me. Grandma, did you have anyone fix the heating system lately? Only Brian. He came a few times, did everything himself. At the time, I didn't know his last visit had set off the chain of events that led to the day Ethan told me to pack and leave immediately. Ethan didn't say much that afternoon. I saw him wandering around the house, from the bedroom to the living room to the upstairs hallway, like someone searching for something he didn't want to find. By evening, he finally asked, Grandma, can I go down to the basement? I want to check the heating system. I nodded without a hint of suspicion. That basement had been Henry's workshop, where he built tables, fixed cabinets, and repaired tools. Since his passing, hardly anyone had gone down there except Brian, who'd occasionally check the pipes or furnace. Ethan switched on the light and disappeared behind the old wooden door. The sound of footsteps and clinking metal echoed from below. Strange, uneasy. I sat in the kitchen chair, nerves tightening with every passing minute. Half an hour went by, then came a loud thud, followed by silence. I had just stood up when the door opened. Ethan emerged, his shirt dusty, face pale. The look in his eyes made my chest tighten. Grandma, he said hoarsely, we have to leave. Now. Ethan, what? Not now. Please, trust me. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through a few photos, and held it up. I saw images of pipes, joints, and a small box with wires. I couldn't make sense of any of it. What is that? Ethan took a deep breath. It's a carbon monoxide line connected directly to your bedroom vent. There's a timer built in. When the room heats up, it opens a valve and releases gas. My head spun. That's impossible. Remember the detector on the ceiling? He climbed onto a chair, removed it, and opened the back. The batteries are soldered shut. It doesn't actually work. Someone rigged it to beep during tests, but it's dead. Inside. I felt dizzy. Brian, he's the one who said he checked it. Ethan set the device on the table, his eyes red. I don't want to believe it, but the setup, it's the work of someone who knows HVAC systems, someone with professional experience. I trembled. My son. Ethan sat across from me, voice breaking. Grandma, this wasn't an accident. Someone did this on purpose, and I don't think Brian was alone. I think he had help. I couldn't speak. Images of Brian as a child flooded my mind, running beside Henry, laughing as his father taught him to hammer his first nail, then years later in his graduation suit, hugging me proudly. I once believed the boy would carry on his father's legacy. Now, he might be plotting to kill the woman who gave him life. Ethan raised his phone again, snapping more photos. I'll upload everything to the cloud just in case. Grandma, grab your coat, your meds, your papers. We're leaving. I won't let anyone hurt you. I looked around the kitchen, where Henry once laughed, the home that had held half my lifetime. Suddenly, everything felt foreign, as if the house had turned into a trap and I'd been living inside it, blind. Pain stabbed through my chest, not just from fear, but from something more profound. The realization that the son I raised with love was gone, replaced by a stranger wearing his face. Ethan took my hand. I promise you'll be safe, but we have to go. Don't call anyone, especially Brian. I nodded through tears. The door closed behind us, leaving Henry's home, once filled with laughter, now just a hollow shell holding guilt and betrayal. The abandoned house sat along a narrow road at the edge of town, a 2-story structure boarded up and overgrown with weeds. Ethan knew it because he had once repaired the house's roof next door. He parked by the broken fence, helped me down, and guided me through the back door. No one knew we were there. At least, not yet. In the dusty living room, Ethan spread his jacket over a torn sofa for me to sit. He opened his phone again, checking the photos and videos from the basement. I couldn't look for long. Those images twisted my stomach. I'll back everything up 3 ways, Ethan said, his fingers moving fast across the screen. Cloud, self-email, and a USB copy. We'll need proof if anything happens. Do you really think Brian wanted to kill me? I asked. My voice didn't sound like mine. Ethan paused. I suspected it when I saw how fast you were getting weaker, but after today, there's no doubt. I gripped my shaking hands together. He's my son. Ethan sat across from me. The light from his small flashlight lit only half his face. I think it might not be just Uncle Brian. Someone helped him, maybe Aunt Rachel. That's impossible, I protested weakly. Rachel would never. She works in insurance, Ethan said. She knows how to make a death look natural. And Melissa, her bakery's been failing for almost a year. Uncle Brian just lost his job at Apex Systems, right? I froze. How do you know that? I stopped by his house a few weeks ago. There were bank letters marked delinquent. I overheard him on the phone talking about mass layoffs. I remembered how tired Brian looked at Thanksgiving. He barely touched half his turkey and snapped at Melissa because she forgot the gravy. When I asked, he only said, "Work's been stressful." None of them ever told me the truth. Ethan pulled a folded, worn piece of paper from his wallet. "This is last year's appraisal on your house. Do you remember?" I nodded. $850,000. You own it outright, no mortgage. If something happened to you, it gets split between your 2 children. I closed my eyes. Everything Ethan said made too much sense, too clear, worse. There was nothing I could say to refute it. I think they assumed you'd die of natural causes. No one suspects carbon monoxide. No autopsy unless there's foul play. But the doctor suspected something, I said. He said it clearly, CO poisoning. And Uncle Brian denied it. Blamed you for leaving your car running in the garage, even though your garage is detached. Their plan is still moving forward. They're just buying time. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the cracked ceiling. Rachel once told me her husband needed special kidney meds, $2,500 a month. Melissa took out a loan to open her bakery, but no one came during the pandemic. Brian refused to let Henry help him when he was alive. He always thought he was smarter than his father. Ethan was quiet for a moment, then softly. I remember when I was 10, Grandpa Henry taught me how to chisel wood. Uncle Brian watched for a minute, then walked back inside. Grandpa asked if he wanted to help. Brian said, "I'm an engineer, not a carpenter." I didn't get it then, but now I do. I clenched my fingers. That's not a reason to try to kill your own mother. Ethan nodded. It's not a reason, but it's an excuse. They're desperate. And when people are desperate, morality gets replaced by numbers. We sat in silence in that cold room. Wind howled through the rotten wood slats, bringing the emptiness of night and a creeping dread. It felt like I was burying a piece of my heart right there, the part that once believed family was the safest place in the world. "I'll protect you," Ethan said, his voice steady, "even if it means standing against my own father." I looked at him. My grandson with no fancy degree, who hadn't followed the successful path the family once laid out, but who stood as the only one with integrity, values, and loyalty to what's right. The first knock came close to midnight. Ethan had just dozed off after hours of tension when I heard it. 3 knocks, soft but distinct, from the back door of the abandoned house. I froze in the chair, heart pounding like an alarm. Ethan's eyes opened instantly. Without a word, he got up and glanced through the cracked wooden blinds. A dark SUV was parked right outside the fence. Ethan whispered, "They found us." He guided me toward the back of the kitchen, where a narrow hallway led to a side entrance. "Grandma, don't say a word. Don't react, no matter who's out there." Another noise. This time the front door rattled hard. Then a voice, familiar but chilling in its calmness. "Mom, it's Brian. I know you're in there. We need to talk." Ethan grabbed his phone and pressed a button. The screen lit up. Calling 911. He didn't say a word, just kept the line open. I saw his hands tremble, not from fear, but from the weight of what he was about to do. Then came another voice. "Melissa." "We don't want to scare you, Mrs. Callahan. We just want to clear up a misunderstanding." Ethan pulled me into a dusty storage room. His hand rested firmly on my shoulder as his eyes darted around. No exit except the rear door, already blocked. A loud kick, then a heavy thud. "Mom, I'm counting to 3. "You don't have to do this, Brian," I whispered. But no one heard. The sound of shattering glass. They were inside. Ethan pulled me behind a pile of wooden crates and held me close. He grabbed a thick wooden bar from the shelf, gripping it tight. The door flew open. Rachel walked in. In her hand was a syringe filled with a clear liquid. "Mom," she said sweetly, sickeningly sweet, "we don't want to hurt you. You're just confused. This will help you relax." Ethan stepped in front of me. "Step back." "Ethan, you don't understand," Rachel said, stepping closer. "She's sick. She's paranoid. If you don't let us handle this, it'll only get worse." I stood up, voice trembling. "Rachel, what is that? What's in that syringe?" "Just a sedative, Mom, nothing harmful." Then came rushed footsteps from the front. Brian entered, holding a steel rod. "Ethan, that's enough. Give her to us. You don't understand what's going on." "No," Ethan said calmly. "I understand exactly. There's a CO gas line under her room. The detector's disabled. I have pictures, and 911's been listening this whole time." Brian froze. His face twitched. "We're out of options," he growled. "If the police find what's in that house, everything falls apart." Melissa appeared in the rear doorway, blocking our escape. The 3 of them surrounded us in the dark room, one holding a syringe, one with a metal rod, and one blocking the only way out. Rachel stepped forward. Ethan, you could save this entire family just by taking one step back. Ethan turned to me. Run when I say. You can't. 1. Brian raised the rod. 2. Rachel popped the syringe cap. Ethan shouted, now! He shoved me aside and lunged at Brian, slamming the wooden plank into his arm. The rod clattered to the floor. Brian staggered. Rachel lunged, but I stumbled backward and fell. And right then, police sirens screamed, just outside the house. Headlights flashed through the broken windows, red and blue light flooding the dusty room. Police, freeze! Drop your weapons! Brian raised his hands slowly. Rachel stood frozen, the syringe slipping from her fingers. Melissa began to sob, backing into the wall. Ethan stood before me, forehead slick with sweat, breathing hard. We were being hunted, he roared. Everything's recorded. Please, help my grandmother. The officers quickly subdued all 3. A young cop helped me up, whispering, Mrs. Callahan, you're safe now. Everything's been documented. I looked back. Rachel was handcuffed, her eyes unfocused. Brian was silent, face blank. Melissa was sobbing uncontrollably. None of them looked like the family I once knew. Ethan grabbed my hand and squeezed. I told you, Grandma. I wouldn't let anyone hurt you. I sat in the waiting room at the police station, my hands still trembling even though it had been over an hour since we were taken from the abandoned house. Everything felt like a dream, a nightmare, from which I didn't know how to wake up or return to my old life. Ethan sat beside me, eyes fixed straight ahead, shoulders tense. He was only 25, yet at that moment he looked like a man who had weathered a lifetime of storms. A sharp-eyed, middle-aged woman entered the room and extended her hand. I'm Detective Donna Marks. We've listened to the full 911 call. Now we'll need formal statements from both of you. Ethan nodded. I have pictures, videos, notes on Grandma's symptoms, even the hospital reports. Donna opened her notebook and motioned for a tech to start the recording. I began to speak. Every detail, from the first headache to the fall in the bathroom to Brian checking the detector. I spoke flatly, but each word felt like a needle straight through my heart. Ethan handed his phone to the officers. It contained photos of the illegal gas installation, videos showing the pipe layout and the timer mechanism, notes on the disabled carbon monoxide detector, and the full recording from the abandoned house, where Brian, Rachel, and Melissa made damning admissions thinking they had us cornered. 3 days later, the police executed a search warrant at my home, the home I no longer had the strength to return to. They found a timed valve mechanism for gas release, ventilation shafts sealed with industrial-grade plastic, a gas detector with tampered internal components, a folder in Brian's garage titled Asset Analysis Access Strategy. On Brian's personal computer, they found a folder named CO Control Details. One file described the specific gas levels needed to induce memory loss in elderly victims. Another file read, if death occurs during sleep, the doctor won't perform a thorough exam. Symptoms should last 2 to 3 months. Rachel didn't escape either. Her work email showed multiple visits to resources on how insurance companies handle elderly deaths and how to reduce the likelihood of forensic investigations. Melissa, though not involved in the technical setup, had texted Rachel, if we don't do it soon, the bank takes the house next month. She's weak already. 1 more dose and it's done. The trial was held 3 months later. The courtroom was cold, solemn, no unnecessary sound. Brian sat at the defense table, his face now drained of confidence, no trace of the smug grin I used to see in family photos. Melissa sat with her head bowed, eyes swollen. Rachel looked straight ahead, but her eyes were utterly hollow. They called me to speak before sentencing. I stood. My voice didn't shake. I had practiced these words 100 times in my head. My husband, Henry Callahan, built that house with his own hands, every brick, every joint. He didn't leave behind much money, but he left values that this family once held dear: hard work, honesty, and compassion. I never imagined that the very children I once held in my arms, taught to read, raised with all my love, it would turn that home into a murder trap. But through all of this, one thing could not be destroyed: the love and loyalty of my grandson, Ethan, who inherited not just his grandfather's hands, but also his heart. I looked at Brian. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed your father. If Henry were still alive, this would have killed him all over again, with shame. The judge nodded, then read the sentences aloud. Brian Callahan, 18 years in prison for conspiracy to commit murder, intentional aggravated assault, and evidence tampering. Melissa Callahan, 15 years for aiding and abetting attempted murder. Rachel Cooper, 12 years for planning the crime and using professional expertise to cover it up. No one objected. No one spoke. They left the courtroom in silence. 3 people I once called family. Outside the courthouse, the December wind cut like a blade. Ethan draped a coat over my shoulders. I looked up at the gray sky and whispered, I would have died if it weren't for you. Ethan gently squeezed my hand. You're my family, and I never leave my family behind. 6 months after the trial, I sold the old house, not because I needed the money, but because I couldn't live another day in a place that once symbolized love, only to be turned into a tool for murder. The realtor said the market was strong. My home, with its front garden, the 40-year-old maple tree, and the garage Henry built with his own hands, was appraised at $825,000. A young couple with 2 children placed a deposit after just 1 viewing. They said they wanted to remodel the kitchen and add a study room for their oldest daughter. I nodded, smiled, and turned away. Ethan handled everything. He met the lawyers, signed the contracts, and spoke with the buyers. As for me, I just sat in the truck and waited. On our final day clearing the house, Ethan did something I never asked for but will be grateful for the rest of my life. He removed every kitchen cabinet Henry had made, one by one, carefully, lovingly, wiping off the dust of decades. The oak doors, the dovetail joints, the satin matte finish, all still glowing under the late afternoon sun. I'm not letting these be replaced with cheap plywood, Ethan said. They're part of him. I could only nod, speechless. My new apartment is on the 3rd floor of a small suburban building. It's quiet, there's an elevator, and most importantly, no one knows I'm here. At first, the landlord didn't allow interior changes, but after meeting Ethan and hearing about 40-year-old cabinets built by Grandpa, he gave in. It took Ethan 2 days to reinstall everything. I sat on a small kitchen chair watching every familiar move, his measuring, his level checks, the soft whirl of the drill. It felt like watching Henry come back to life. When Ethan finished, the kitchen lit up. Henry's oak cabinets now stood proudly in a new space, aged but not outdated, like a memory passed from generation to generation. That evening, Ethan brought someone with him. "Grandma, this is Emily." She had a gentle smile, a few paint streaks on her hands, and the faint scent of wood on her jacket. She was a maker, ceramics, woodwork, textiles, anything crafted by hand. "Ethan's told me so much about you," Emily said during dinner, "and about the values your husband lived by, that doing it right is more important than doing it fast." I saw the look she gave my grandson, the kind that understands what's truly valuable, and I felt peace. Since then, Ethan has come for dinner every Thursday, sometimes alone, sometimes with Emily. He brings fresh produce, tells stories about his new projects, kind clients, and a few grumpy bosses, then laughs like a child. I've learned to sleep without checking the door lock 5 times. Thanks to someone who never gave up on me, I've learned to trust the world again. One spring morning, I found a letter in the mailbox. No return address. I opened it. Just a few lines, in a soft, slanted script. Rachel's handwriting. "Mom, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know. I miss our kitchen. I miss the chamomile tea you used to make. I was wrong, and I will carry that for the rest of my life. If there's a next life, I'd want to be your daughter again, so I could get it right this time. I didn't know whether to cry or smile. I didn't write back, but I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, alongside Henry's wedding photo, my recipe notebook, and a hand-drawn kitchen plan by Ethan. Family isn't defined by blood. Family is made of those who choose to stay, even after everything has fallen apart. I used to think betrayal was the worst thing that could happen. Now I know worse than betrayal is being forgotten. For years, I kept the fire burning in our home. Baked bread every Sunday, made Brian's favorite lasagna, wrapped Christmas gifts for all the grandkids. But slowly, that role was treated like an old tradition, something they told me, "Mom, you should rest," but really meant, "Mom, step aside." I don't blame the past. I just regret believing I still had space in my children's hearts. But thanks to Ethan, I've relearned something vital. Family doesn't have to share blood. Family is when people choose to protect each other, no matter what. I live simply now. Mornings with books, afternoons tending plants, evenings are spent cooking for 2 young people, my grandson and the girl building a life with him. They don't leave me alone on holidays. They ask my opinion when picking curtain colors. They listen when I talk about Henry, not out of politeness, but because they want to understand. One day, Ethan asked, "Do you hate my dad?" I paused, then said, "Yes, but I choose not to hold on to that hate, because hate is like fire. It burns the one who carries it the longest." I haven't fully forgiven, but I won't let anger define what's left of my life. I sent Rachel a small package in prison. No sender name. Inside was a photo of the old kitchen, now rebuilt in my new apartment, and a handwritten note. Roots can lie buried in the soil for a long time, but they still live. If you're brave enough to heal, they can grow again. I know I may not have many years left as I write this, but I'm not afraid. I was saved not just by medicine or justice, but by the love of the next generation, a love that asks for nothing in return. Ethan and Emily are getting married soon. They say it'll be small, just the people who truly matter. I smile knowing I still have a seat in their lives. And if you're reading or listening to this story, I hope you carry just one thing with you. The elderly are not a burden. They are the roots. Family should never be about who is more worthy of life, but about holding on to one another, even when everything is broken. That's the end of my story. But if you believe, like I do, that every life, every lesson, and every act of forgiveness deserves to be heard, hit that subscribe button, because here we tell stories not just to entertain, but to remind each other that truth, family, and courage always have a place, at any age.